Welcome back to Mobile Programming. In our first series, our first iteration of the series, we have looked at the basics of creating graphical user interfaces. And we would have explored the toolkit, the HTML toolkit, and what it brings to the table. We would have also examined the purpose of CSS in terms of styling the user interface. And in particular, we leveraged a particular tool known as Tailwind CSS that makes your life easier in that regard. In this, the second part of our series, we want to start looking at the React framework and see what the React framework brings to the table in terms of building these graphical user interfaces. So this particular session is going to be more of a practical session, and we are going to be constructing the component that is displayed right here on the screen. So let's jump into things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare our environment. And I will be using Visual Studio Code, which is the editor of choice that I want to be using for this particular series. So I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to get rid of the welcome screen. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder that I can use. So I'm going to the location where I want to create my folder. And let me call the folder React Example or Examples. I'm going to then grab that folder and I'm going to put it into Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to drag it over into the environment, into the editor. And what that does is it makes the folder available inside the editor. I'm going to also bring up my command window or my terminal, and I can go to View and I can select the terminal option. And then I want to create my scaffolding for the application that I'm going to create. Going back to our document, it indicates that in order to actually create our scaffolding, we're going to make use of a particular command called create vite, and we are using the Node Package Manager or NPM to actually execute that command. So it's npm create vite at latest. So vite is going to be a piece of software that will help us with scaffolding. At latest will allow us to use the current version of vite. And my app is going to be the name that you want to give to your application. So let's go back to VS Code. And we are going to use our terminal or command window to execute that code. So npm create vite at latest, and I'm going to give it a name. So let's call it React EG01. So React example 01, and I hit the enter key. Now there are some scaffolding that is going to be done, and it's going to be asking us some questions. So I'm going to select React because that's the type of UI that we want to create. I will be using TypeScript, so we want to select that. Use roll down Vite experimental. We are selecting the default, which is no. And install with npm and start no. We're going to say yes. So it says that we are installing some dependencies. And dependencies simply mean some packages that we want to use as we develop our application. So these packages are going to be important. And this will take a little bit of time for the installation to become complete. While that is being done, let's go back and have a look at what it is we are going to create. So we have a text box here. We have two buttons. We have a container in which they are stored. And the container has a bit of color just to indicate the boundaries of the container. When I click on set me, then I want to place a predefined value inside of the text box. For example, the value is 17. And when we click sum me, then we also want to add a predetermined value to the value that was set. For example, we want to add 5. So it means that set me would put 17, sum me would add 5 to the 17, and we would want to display the result back inside the text box. So that's what we're going to be coding up. And just by doing this simple example, it will teach us some of the concepts that we need to understand as we move into the React ecosystem. So checking back on our installation process, it tells us that we are using Vite version 7.1.9, and it also gives us a URL that we can go to. So we're going to go to the URL, hold down the control key, and then we are going to left click on the link. And we are seeing a starting screen here. The fact that we are seeing Vite and React being displayed means that the application is up and running. There's also a box here that we can click on, a button. And as I click on the button, you realize that it's responding because the button count keeps on going up. So we have a working React application right now. So we want to kind of step back and start to build the application that we are targeting from scratch. Now remember, we had indicated that we had done some scaffolding. So looking inside our React examples folders, it was blank before, but now we are seeing that it has something called React EG01. And that's the name of the folder that we had created right at the beginning of the process. So remember, in our NPM statement, we had indicated that the name that we want to give our application is React EG01. So that is the folder that we're now seeing here. The next step in the process, therefore, is to ensure that we go into that particular folder so that we can make adjustments. So I'm going to kill the server that is currently running. So it's Control-C inside our terminal window. And when it asks whether or not we want to terminate the batch job, we are going to type Y for yes and hit the Enter key. So we have stopped our React application. And we are now going back so that we can visualize what it is we want to create. So remember, we have the container, we have a text box, we have two buttons. So back to our screen, our VS Code screen. We want to navigate to the folder that we had created. So we cd react eg01. We hit enter. We're now inside the directory, but we want to load up the directory inside, or the folder inside of VS Code. So the shortcut way of doing that after we have navigated into the folder by virtue of using the terminal is simply to type code followed by a full stop or the period. And this is simply saying we want to open Visual Studio Code into the current folder. The current folder that we are in is React EG01. So let's hit the enter key. And we are now inside our folder. And just by looking, you realize that there are some codes here which were pre-created inside of this folder. So remember, this folder did not exist before. We use the npm command to use Vite to do the scaffolding. And this is the kind of scaffolding that we have ended up with. We're going to open back a terminal in this new environment, inside this new folder. And what we're going to do first is we're going to create a virtual environment. So in order to create the virtual environment, we type Python -m venv or venv, and then the name of the virtual environment that we want to create. I'm going to call it .virtual or virtual env. I'm going to hit enter. And once again, there's some stuff that will be done in the background. If you have a look, you can see that a folder called .virtual env is being created. It's now complete. And if we open the folder, you'll realize that there are some elements which are inside of the folder. We now want to navigate into this particular virtual environment so that we can activate it. So we're going to type .virtual env, that's the name of the folder. So .virtual env /scripts /activate. So just to show what is happening, if we go into virtual env, we will see a folder called scripts, which is what we are going into. And once we are in there, there is a command or a file called activate. That's the file that we are going to execute. So enter. And based on my configuration, you are seeing that the virtual environment is now activated. All right, great. So we can now clear our screen. We can now begin the process. Now, just to give you an idea of what exactly is happening, there are several files here which are working together. One of them being index.html. And this is going to be an HTML document that creates the starting point for our React application. So you can understand why I have started out with HTML, because it gives you the framework, as I mentioned earlier, so that React is understandable. And the key points to note here in this file is to be found inside the body. And inside the body, we have something called a root. So it's simply a diff container that has the ID of root. And we also have a script tag that is pointing to a file called main.txt, and that file is actually found inside the SRC or the source folder. If we go to the source folder and we look at main.txt, you realize that it's calling something called app. And this app looks like a normal HTML tag, but it's not. So this is actually going to be a tag that we create in React. And this is known as a JSX tag. So going back to our jottings, please note that JSX means JavaScript XML. So it is an XML file that is created using JavaScript. And what it does is it allows developers to write HTML-like codes. So that is important. We are writing HTML-like codes. And these HTML-looking codes are actually what we call JSX code. So they're going to look like HTML, but they are really a different type of XML file. All right, so jumping back to where we were inside our Visual Studio Code environment, we looked at index.html, we looked at main.txt, and we realized that main.txt actually calls something called app. In order to see what app looks like, we are going to look into app.tsx. And this is pretty much how we set up our components in React. We will be creating functions, and these functions are going to represent the tags, the JSX tags that we are creating. So the function is called app, which means that we are going to be creating a tag, a JSX tag called app. Importantly to note, at the end, we need to export this tag. So export default app. We're exporting app as a default. Also note that this particular file is making use of the file called app.css, and that's just for styling purposes. We will not be using CSS in this particular format. Remember, we're going to be using tailwind.css. But just to note as well that there are a couple of imports which are happening in this file. And whenever we use import, this is how we get additional functionality into the file itself, because we are making use of things that already exist elsewhere within our file structure or within our ecosystem. All right, so I think we have had enough of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new TSX file because I want to create a new application or a new tag. So notice that that file is inside the source folder. So we want to ensure that the source folder is selected, and then we are going to create a new file. And this new file, let's call it not calculator. Let's call it show me. So I'm going to create a TX file called show me. It's going to be a TSX file. And inside that file, I'm going to create a function. And this function is going to be called show me. Functions have a begin and an end. And at the very end of the file, we need to export default and the name of the tag, show me. Now I'm saving, and I'm now going to go to main.tsx, and wherever we see app, we're going to remove that, and we're going to put our own tag that we are now creating. So it's called show me. Now it says that it cannot find show me, so we need to import it. So let's import show me. And this tells us where it thinks that show me is. Show me is in the current directory. And we know it's in the current directory because we see the single period. Single period means current directory. So look inside the current directory and you will see show me.txt. So import show me. We will just select this first option here. And it says that show me is coming from the current directory. Now, we need to decide where are we in the structure. And we are currently inside React EG01. Show me though is inside the SRC folder, which is inside React EG01. So therefore means that we should actually be getting show me from the current directory, then SRC, and then show me.tsx. All right, so let's continue. We now want to go back. Well, this says we have an error. So that means it's not finding the file at that location. I'm just checking to see whether or not I created it at the right spot. So I'm looking inside source, and inside source, I'm seeing show me.txt. All right, that looks fine, but let me just get rid of the, let me have it here for now, and we will continue with what we're doing, and then we'll have a look back at this file to see what exactly is the issue. So remember, main.tsx, we need to go back to that. So going back to our show me, it needs to have a return statement. And inside the return statement, we need to return a JSX expression. So because I know we need a container, I'm going to create div that is actually going to function as the container. And inside div, I'm just going to type some message. This is the show me container. We're going to save. And we are going to actually execute so that we can see what is happening. Now, in terms of executing, we need to run a particular command. So let's go and have a look at the command. And the command that we want to use whenever we are going to execute the application is npm run dev. So npm run dev, this particular command here, that's the one we are going to execute. So let's type npm run dev. All right, so we are seeing that it's giving us the URL to click on. So we are going to click on the URL. And we are indeed saying that information is being displayed. So if we look at the container, we have the message that says, this is the show me container. So it means that our application is up and running and we can continue to make additional customizations. You'll also note that what we had previously in terms of the logos and so on, those have disappeared. And they have disappeared because I am now using a different tag. So if we go back to main.tsx, note we previously had app inside here, but now we have replaced the app tag with the show me tag. And the show me tag is the component that we have created here. And we have created it by making a function. So the function is called show me. Now I'm going to do this another way. I'm going to use what is called an arrow function because that is what is predominantly being used in the industry. So it scans the name of the tag show me is equal to, you put an open bracket, and then we kind of put this arrow, it's an equal sign followed by a greater than sign. And then we have our curly brace. And within the curly brace, we are going to put our return statement. And then I will get rid of the original function. And I'm executed. So let me stop again. So Control C. My terminal window seems as if it is messed up. So I'm going to kill it. Kill the terminal window. I'm going to open a new one. So view terminal. I want to ensure that I am back where I was. So CD. Well, let me do a ls. In React examples, and I want to be in React EG01. So let me type code dot. And I should now be at the correct place. So let me now continue to make some adjustments. I'm going to run npm run dev. All right, so I am at the wrong space. That means my code dot, oh, that's my bad. Code that is going to actually load me into the current directory, which is not what I want. I want to go back to the React examples directory. So I'm going to close the files. And I'm just going to go back from scratch. All right, so here I am. I'm at React EG01. So I can continue to make the modifications that we were talking about. So we are going to npm run dev, up and running, control, and we click. And we are seeing that we are still seeing the message. This is the show me container, which means that the arrow function is working. And if I change the message, so I'm going to go back to show me.txt, and I'm going to say this works with an exclamation mark. And if I save that and I go back to have a look at my screen, so I'm going to run npm run dev again, so I can look at my application. So control and click. And the message has been updated. It works. So we know that we are at the correct place in terms of our application. And we know that our application is working as we intend for it to work. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to now start setting up the basic structure within the container that we have. And to set up that basic structure, then it means that we need a text box. We need two buttons. So right here inside our show me component, and specifically within the div, because remember the div is going to be the container, we now want to put in the various tags that will create the kind of output that we're looking for. So one of the things we know we're going to need is a button. And for the button, we want to have set me on the button. So that's one button. But we need to have two buttons. So let's copy this code, paste it, and it is set me. And the other thing is now going to be click sum me. I think that's what we had. Sum me. So we have two buttons. We save. And then we are going to relaunch the URL. So click, we go to the URL, and you are seeing that we have our two buttons being displayed. We have the set me button, and we have the sum me button. So things are working in terms of our user interface so far. Another thing that we will need is the text box. So we're going to place the text box before the buttons. Remember, to place the text box, we are going to need to make use of the input tag. So it's the input tag. And the type has to be a text type. So we're going to say type is equal to text. Now, bear in mind, this is not really HTML. It is JSX, but it looks like HTML because there is a kind of relationship, kind of one-to-one relationship between JSX code and the HTML code. In other words, whenever we write these JSX codes, they're actually going to be converted to HTML codes or HTML tags in the background. So we have set up our type, and we say that type is equal to text, similar to what we would have done inside of HTML. We put the text inside these squiggly brackets or these curly brackets just to indicate that we are dealing with JavaScript code. So anytime you see us have the squiggly brackets and you see anything inside of it, it means that those things that you're looking at inside of it are actually be treated as JavaScript code. So it's time to look back at our user interface. And you are seeing that we have the three elements now. We have our text box, which is being displayed. We have our set me button, and we have our sum me button. So we have basically constructed the framework in terms of the user interface. The other thing that we want to do quickly is we want to set up the component so that we can actually make use of the Tailwind CSS file. And what we are going to do is we're going to get that URL that points to the Tailwind CSS package, and we're going to make it available inside our React package. So we are going to go to index.html. Remember, that is kind of like the starting point. And inside the head, we are going to actually be placing a script tag. And the script tag has as its source the URL to the Tailwind package that we want to make use of. So notice it says https cdn.tailwindcss.com. Now, let us try and see whether or not this actually works, because we are going to now go back to our code. So it's a show me code, and we are going to now try and add a bit of styling. Now, in HTML, we would have used class, but because this is JSX, we are going to be using class name. So let's say BG red, let's say 500. Let's save. And we need to launch back the application. So control click. And we notice that something has changed, but we are not seeing the red color. So let's go back to our code. Let's put border. And let's see if we are seeing any displays. And we are not seeing any displays, but you can see that there is a little border that is now showing around the elements. So let's add some more customization. All right, so I noticed that there was an error in the BG red. It's BG red. Well, it's BG hyphen red. And I need to put another hyphen for the 500, which is the intensity. So going back to the code, we are seeing that we have the red container. Now, I want some spacing to be in between these elements on the inside of the container. So it therefore means that I need to be adding some padding. So let me say I'm going to do padding all around of 4. And let's have a look at how that looks. And I'm seeing that things look a bit more clear. So I put some spacing on the inside of the div container. I think the red is a bit too bright. If we go back to what we had here, it looks less intense. So I'm going to bring the intensity level down a bit. So let's get to maybe about 200. We save. I'm just going back to examine. All right. So I think we can work at this 200, or maybe we can even put it to 100. So I put it at 100, and well, that looks about fine. I'm also seeing though that we are going to need some spacing between the elements. So the buttons are too close to each other and the text box is too close to the buttons. So what we want to do is to put a bit of margins in between these components. So that's what we are going to be looking at doing now. So we're going to experiment. So I want some margins, but I want the margins on the x-axis. So let me go to the button first of all. The last button. Class name. Remember that's how we use our Tailwind.css codes. And let us put in a margin, let's say of about 4. And we want to put that on the x-axis. Save. And we see that SumMe has moved away from SetMe. So I want SetMe to move away from the text box. So I'm going to put the same setting on that button. So I'm just going to copy and I'm going to paste. And let's look at what obtains. So we have SetMe, we have SumMe, we have some spaces in between the items. And so far, things are looking good. So I'll stop for now. And in the next part of the series, I will now look at continuing this same framework so that we can build it out. But in the interim, I want you to follow along with what I have done and take your particular application to this stage. And then in the next session, we will now finish setting things up, especially in terms of getting the interactivity. As you realize here, when I click on these buttons, they do absolutely nothing. And so there are some concepts that we have to consider or understand so that we can get that kind of interaction to be working seamlessly. So look out for the next session. Take care.